What would you do if you walked in on your trusted cleaner breastfeeding your baby? Esther, a powerful billionaire, had everything: the luxury, the status, the perfect life. But when she found her maid, Ngozi, nursing her child, everything she thought she knew came crashing down. The shock, the anger, the betrayal. This story will keep you hooked from start to finish. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Stick with us till the end, because this story is about to get even more intense. Esther lived a life many could only dream of. At 35, she had built an empire from scratch, climbing the business ladder with relentless determination. She was the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in Nigeria, known for its cutting-edge software solutions. Her office was a sleek, glass-walled space overlooking the skyline of Lagos. Her mornings began with meetings, her afternoons filled with negotiations, and her evenings spent entertaining clients at upscale restaurants or charity events. Yet, despite her hectic schedule, Esther's world was perfect, at least on the surface. She lived in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Victoria Island, a home designed to reflect her success. It had everything she could ever want: a private gym, a pool with a view of the ocean, and rooms filled with luxury. Every inch of the house was meticulously arranged, with expensive art on the walls and designer furniture. There were staff members to take care of every need: cooks, cleaners, drivers, and a nanny for her one-year-old son, Jaden. For all intents and purposes, Esther had it all. But beneath the surface of this perfection, there was a side of Esther that not many people saw. She had sacrificed much to reach where she was. Her days were long, her mind often consumed by the weight of her business. She had no time for personal connections, no space for true friendships. Her marriage to Tunde, a successful businessman in his own right, had become more of an arrangement than a partnership. They had grown distant over the years, their lives dominated by their separate careers. They were more like strangers living under the same roof, bound by an agreement to raise their son, Jaden. Esther's love for her son was undeniable. Jaden was her world. She made time for him whenever she could, despite her busy schedule. He was her little prince, the one part of her life that still felt completely hers. And yet, even with all the time she spent with him, there was something unsettling about their bond. Esther had never been one to shy away from change. She had built her empire on the ability to adapt and pivot, to always find the right person for the job, no matter how difficult. So, when her longtime cleaner, who had been with the family for years, decided to leave for personal reasons, Esther didn't think twice about hiring a replacement. She needed someone dependable, someone trustworthy who could keep up with the demands of the house. But little did she know, this seemingly simple decision would set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. The day Esther met Ngozi, she was immediately struck by the young woman's quiet demeanor. Ngozi had come highly recommended by a friend, a fellow businesswoman who praised her reliability and professionalism. Esther's first impression was that Ngozi was efficient and polite, the kind of person she could count on to get the job done. At 28, Ngozi had a calm, almost soothing presence. Her dark skin glowed with health, and her deep, soulful eyes seemed to hold a world of experience, though her smile was warm and welcoming. In the beginning, Ngozi was just another employee, another face in the long line of people who worked for Esther. She came in each morning promptly at 7 a.m. and left in the evening when everything in the house was clean and tidy. At first, Esther barely noticed her, except when she would pass by the kitchen or the living room and see Ngozi moving about, making sure the house ran smoothly. The household was never without a sense of calm when Ngozi was around. She did everything quietly, without fuss, and without expecting any acknowledgement. It was refreshing, really. Esther could feel the burden of managing the house lighten just by having someone so efficient and dependable in her life. However, it wasn't just the household chores that Ngozi took care of. She quickly became the central figure in Jaden's life. When she wasn't cleaning, she was attending to the baby. Ngozi had a natural way with children, an innate gentleness that made her seem like a mother herself. Esther had noticed this on several occasions when she would pass by the nursery and see Ngozi humming softly to Jaden, rocking him to sleep. At first, Esther was grateful for Ngozi's caring nature, thinking that she needed help with the baby, especially since work kept her away so much. But as days turned into weeks, Esther began to notice something more unsettling. Jaden had become increasingly attached to Ngozi. It was subtle at first, a smile when she entered the room, a reach for her arms when she came close, but soon it grew more pronounced. When Esther tried to pick Jaden up, he would often turn away, preferring to stay in Ngozi's arms. The bond between them was undeniable. For a while, Esther didn't know what to make of it. She told herself it was just a phase, that babies form attachments to different people at different stages. But in the quiet moments, when she watched them interact, there was an uneasiness growing inside her. Esther tried to shake off her growing discomfort. After all, she had hired Ngozi to help care for the baby, and she had always prided herself on being a professional. She had no time for emotional entanglements. Her world was one of numbers, meetings, and deadlines. The personal stuff, family, relationships, was always secondary. But no matter how hard she tried to suppress it, the feelings wouldn't go away. There was something about the way Jaden seemed so comforted by Ngozi that made Esther feel as though she was being replaced. As if her child, the one thing she had worked so hard for, had found a connection with someone who wasn't her. The tension continued to build as weeks went by. On some days, Esther would come home to find Jaden asleep in Ngozi's arms, and something in her chest would tighten. She tried to remind herself that she had hired Ngozi to take care of Jaden when she couldn't be there. But why did it feel like Ngozi was doing more than just her job? Why did it feel like she was becoming a second mother to Jaden, one that Esther had never been able to be? Then there were the small moments, the quiet interactions that Esther couldn't ignore. She would walk into the living room and find Ngozi playing with Jaden, her laughter light and carefree. Esther would watch from a distance, unsure of how to feel. Part of her was relieved that Jaden was being cared for so lovingly. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to admit, felt threatened. She had become a stranger in her own home, watching someone else take the role she had once envisioned for herself. Tunde had noticed the shift in the atmosphere as well. He was often away on business, but when he was home, he seemed to be more attentive to Ngozi than Esther would have liked. It wasn't that he was rude or inappropriate, it was more the way he would talk to her, the way he would greet her with a smile that lingered just a little too long. Esther told herself she was being paranoid, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. She started questioning herself, wondering if her mind was just playing tricks on her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in their home, something that had begun with Ngozi's arrival. Esther wasn't the type of woman to let her feelings control her. She was a businesswoman, a leader in her field. But as she watched Jaden with Ngozi, she began to feel a sense of loss, of something slipping through her fingers. She had always been the one who took care of Jaden. She had always been the one who rocked him to sleep, fed him, held him. But now, there was someone else who seemed to do it better, someone who had taken her place in the quiet moments that mattered most. The tension in the house grew, though Esther tried to keep it under control. She couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within her. Her mind was filled with questions, doubts, and insecurities. What was really going on between Ngozi and her family? Was she just being paranoid, or was there something more to this than she was willing to admit? The more Esther tried to push these thoughts aside, the more they grew, taking root in her mind. It had been 3 months since Ngozi had started working for Esther, and in that time, everything in the house had shifted. Esther's life had grown more complicated, more filled with doubts and questions. The uncomfortable feeling that had been slowly building inside her was now a constant companion. She couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't just the way Jaden had become so attached to Ngozi, it was everything. The way Ngozi seemed to glide through the house effortlessly, the way she handled everything with such grace, and the way Esther's own home felt less like her own with every passing day. It was early in the morning when Esther's discomfort reached its peak. She had just returned from a late-night business meeting, the cool Lagos breeze brushing against her skin as she stepped out of the car. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning inside. She was exhausted, her eyes heavy from the stress of the meeting. But as she entered the house, something felt off. The stillness in the air wasn't peaceful, it was unsettling. It felt as though something had changed, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. As Esther walked into the living room, she froze. There, on the sofa, sat Tunde and Ngozi. They were deep in conversation, their voices low, but what caught Esther's attention was the closeness between them. It wasn't anything overt, there was no obvious flirtation or inappropriate gestures, but the way they spoke to each other, the way they shared a quiet moment in the middle of the night, made something stir within Esther. The laughter in their voices seemed to come so naturally, as if they had known each other for years, and the warmth between them felt a little too comfortable for Esther's liking. Esther stood there for a moment, unseen, unnoticed by the two of them. She watched them exchange a smile, something that lingered just a bit too long, and she felt an odd wave of jealousy wash over her. It wasn't about Tunde, though. No, it was something deeper, something about the way Ngozi seemed to fit into her life so seamlessly, as though she belonged here more than Esther did. Shaking off the feeling, Esther made her presence known by clearing her throat. Both Tunde and Ngozi turned toward her, a quick flash of surprise on their faces before they masked it with smiles. Tunde immediately got up, walking over to greet her, but Esther couldn't shake the image of the two of them sitting there together. Something in the way they looked at each other, the comfort they shared, made her feel like an outsider in her own home. "Late night?" Tunde asked, his tone casual, his eyes soft. There was no hint of guilt in his voice, no indication that he had done anything wrong. Esther nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, the usual. How's Jaden?" "Sleeping soundly," Ngozi replied, her voice soothing, with that same calm tone she always had. "He's in his room, tucked in tight." Esther smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Ngozi. You're always so attentive." The compliment felt hollow to her. It was hard to ignore the growing distance between herself and the people in her life, the distance that had started with Ngozi's arrival and now seemed to stretch further each day. As she headed upstairs to change, her thoughts raced. Was she being paranoid? Was she imagining things? Maybe it was just the exhaustion from her hectic schedule, or maybe she was reading too much into nothing. But as she slipped into bed beside Tunde, she couldn't shake the unease that had taken root deep inside her. The following days didn't bring any relief. If anything, the discomfort only grew. Esther had tried to brush off the small things, the way Jaden seemed to gravitate toward Ngozi, the way Tunde would often look at her with a certain warmth. But now, the unease had become too strong to ignore. She found herself retreating into her work more than ever before, burying herself in spreadsheets and meetings just to avoid the growing tension in the house. There were moments when she would come home and find the house quiet, except for the sound of Jaden's laughter echoing through the halls. She would walk into the living room and find Ngozi sitting with the baby, her arms around him as she whispered something softly in his ear. Esther would watch from the doorway, her heart sinking. There was a connection between them, a bond that seemed to be growing stronger with each passing day, and Esther had no idea how to stop it. At first, she convinced herself that it was normal, that a child would form bonds with those who spent time with them. But the more she saw it, the more she began to question everything. She was his mother. She should be the one he turned to, the one he ran to when he needed comfort. And yet, there was Ngozi, always there, always ready to provide that comfort. It wasn't just Jaden's attachment to Ngozi that bothered her, it was her own. There were times when Esther would catch herself watching Ngozi with the baby, feeling a deep pang of longing. She wanted to be the one who could give Jaden the kind of comfort Ngozi seemed to provide so easily. But no matter how hard she tried, it felt as though something was missing. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew that whatever it was, it had started the moment Ngozi had entered their home. The hardest part was the quiet guilt that ate at Esther. She felt like she had failed as a mother. She had worked so hard to provide Jaden with everything he needed, but somewhere along the way, she had let the most important things slip through her fingers. Her connection with him wasn't as strong as it should be. And as she watched Ngozi with the baby, she couldn't help but wonder if she had missed her chance to be the mother she wanted to be. One evening, as Esther was sitting alone in her study, going over a few business reports, she heard footsteps outside the door. She looked up to see Ngozi standing in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. "I just wanted to let you know that Jaden is asleep," Ngozi said softly. Her voice was always so calming, so gentle. Esther gave a faint smile, nodding. "Thank you, Ngozi. I appreciate it." For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Esther could see the faintest hint of hesitation in Ngozi's gaze. It was as though she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to express it. Esther felt a sudden wave of uncertainty. Had she pushed her too far? Had she allowed this distance to grow to the point where it was now too late to fix? As Ngozi turned to leave, Esther's thoughts lingered on her. There was something about her, something Esther couldn't ignore, something that made her both grateful and uncomfortable. The woman had become more than just a cleaner. She had become a fixture in Esther's life, in her home, and in her family. And as much as Esther tried to deny it, she couldn't help but wonder if she was beginning to feel threatened by her presence. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, the kind where everything in Esther's world seemed to slow down just enough for her to catch her breath. Her workday had been long, filled with meetings and phone calls that kept her mind racing. But now, as the evening settled in and the last traces of daylight disappeared behind the skyline, there was a sense of calm in the house. Jaden was asleep, and the house was, for once, silent. Or so she thought. Esther made her way downstairs, tired but content with the idea of a quiet night. Tunde was still out, finishing up some last-minute business deal, leaving her to wind down on her own. She walked through the hallway, past the living room, and toward the kitchen to grab a drink. But as she passed the nursery door, something caught her attention. A soft sound, a murmur, a hum. It was coming from inside. Curious, she paused for a moment, leaning slightly toward the door. The sound of a lullaby, one that sounded like a low hum, familiar and soothing, drifted through the crack of the door. It was Ngozi's voice, gentle and soft, singing to Jaden in the same way she always did when she wanted to calm him. But this time, there was something different about it, something that made Esther pause longer than usual. Esther's heart raced. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her body seemed to act on its own. She pushed the door open just slightly, not wanting to disturb whatever calmness was in the room but too curious to walk away. As she peeked inside, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the dimly lit room, sat Ngozi, holding Jaden in her arms. But it wasn't just the usual scene of a nanny comforting a baby. Ngozi was breastfeeding Jaden. The baby, peaceful and content in her arms, had his small hand resting on her chest as she gently rocked him. The room felt suddenly too warm, the sight in front of her too intimate, too personal. For a moment, Esther stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This wasn't the kind of thing she had ever expected to witness. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening in front of her. She felt as though the floor had been pulled out from under her. Her baby, her son, was in someone else's arms in a way that felt too familiar, too deep. Her breath hitched, and in that moment, it felt like time had stopped. She had always trusted Ngozi, always assumed that she was nothing more than an employee, a good, reliable one. But this was something else entirely. The boundaries had been crossed, and Esther knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Her world, as perfect as it had seemed, was cracking open before her eyes. Esther backed away slowly, her heart heavy with disbelief. She turned and walked silently down the hall, not wanting to make a sound. Her mind spun, full of questions and emotions she couldn't quite make sense of. How had it come to this? How had she, the mother, let someone else step into this sacred role? How had Ngozi, who had been nothing more than a helper in the house, come to hold such an intimate bond with her child? The next few days passed in a blur for Esther. She couldn't bring herself to confront Ngozi immediately. Her mind was a mess of emotions, anger, confusion, jealousy, and even guilt. She felt betrayed, but at the same time, she felt a strange sense of vulnerability. She had hired Ngozi to help care for Jaden, to be a support when she couldn't be there, but she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to be replaced. Esther tried to put the discovery out of her mind. She returned to her work, buried herself in meetings, and pretended that everything was fine. But every time she looked at Jaden, she saw his innocent eyes, and it made her feel as though she had failed him. She was his mother, and yet, in that moment, she wasn't sure who he needed more. But it wasn't just Jaden's attachment to Ngozi that disturbed her. It was the quiet, growing realization that she had been absent in his life. She had been so wrapped up in her career, in building her empire, that she had missed the little moments that truly mattered. The moments when a mother bonds with her child. She had neglected the very thing she had worked so hard for. She thought about Tunde, about their marriage, and how the distance between them had only grown. Their relationship, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a distant memory. They were two strangers living in the same house, connected only by their shared responsibility for Jaden. Tunde had become more distant, coming home later and later, sometimes not even bothering to check in. He, too, had his own life, his own world, and it was no longer intertwined with hers. Esther's feelings of isolation grew stronger with each passing day. She felt like she was losing everything: her marriage, her son's affection, and the sense of control she had worked so hard to maintain. The loneliness that had always been there, buried under layers of success, now felt suffocating. That afternoon, as Esther sat in her office, going over reports, she received a call from her mother, Ada. Esther hadn't spoken to her in a while, as her mother lived in the countryside, far from the busy life Esther had built in Lagos. Ada had always been a supportive figure, but their relationship had grown distant over the years. It wasn't that Esther didn't love her mother, it was just that she didn't have the time to nurture those bonds. "Esther, my daughter," Ada's voice was warm but concerned. "I've been hearing rumors, and I need to ask you, is everything all right? How's Jaden? How's Tunde?" Esther felt a lump form in her throat. "Everything's fine, Mama," she said quickly, trying to sound convincing. "Just busy, you know. But Jaden is good, Tunde is good. Everything is fine." Ada's voice softened. "You know, my dear, it's important to listen to your heart. Don't let your success blind you from the things that truly matter. Family is everything." Esther swallowed hard. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in a long while, Esther allowed herself to truly listen. Family was everything, but it felt like she had neglected her own. That night, when she returned home, the house was quiet again. Jaden was asleep, and Tunde hadn't yet returned. She walked into the nursery and stood there for a long time, just watching her son sleep. His face was so peaceful, so innocent. Esther ran her fingers over his soft hair, feeling the weight of the moment. She had missed so much. She had missed his first steps, his first words, and now she had almost lost him to someone else. As she sat there, in the dimly lit room, she realized that things had to change. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She couldn't ignore the growing tension in the house, the silence that had settled between her and Tunde, and the bond that had formed between Ngozi and Jaden. It was time for a confrontation. It was time to face what had been building for months, to confront the pain and the fears that had been festering beneath the surface. But as she sat there, holding her sleeping son, she knew one thing for sure: things would never be the same again.